Hey, everybody. We are about to read an amazing book today. And if you are from my school, which is close to Birmingham, Alabama, this story took place right next to our school, about 10 miles away from our school, or less, probably less than 10 miles. So let me share my screen so that you can see. Share. Let me get rid of this. Let's see. Let me get down here where I can present it. Here we go. This is called Meet Miss Fancy by Irene Latham. Oh my goodness, this is such an amazing book. Frank loved elephants. He loved drawing elephants and talking about elephants. He loved their hose pipe trunks and their flap flap ears and their tree stump feet and their swish swish tails. But not once, not ever had Frank seen a real elephant. Which was why Frank leaped out of his seat when his mother told him about Miss Fancy. Just think, Frank, an elephant. That's right, Reverend Brooks said. She's retiring from the circus and moving to Avondale Park. An elephant. Frank could barely breathe. Here? Avondale Park was just 2 blocks from their house. If the city can raise enough money, there's going to be a penny drive in all the schools starting immediately. Frank got right to work collecting pennies. He prayed that the money from his school and all the other schools would be enough money to bring Miss Fancy to Birmingham. It was. On the day Miss Fancy arrived at the train station, Frank cheered with the crowd as the engine hissed to a stop. When Miss Fancy stepped onto the platform, he gasped. She was whiter than a house, and her wrinkly skin was the exact same shade as a thundercloud. When she trumpeted, it made the train whistle sound like a toy. Frank followed as the mayor, some police officers, and the elephant keeper, Mr. Todd, paraded Miss Fancy to her new home. When they reached Avondale Park, Frank stopped in front of the small sign. And if you see right there, it says no colored allowed. Mama, how am I supposed to feed Miss Fancy a peanut if I can't get close? Listen, Frank, I know it's not right, but it's the law. Change will take time. Frank waited for the crowd to thin. Finally, when the park was nearly empty, he climbed a tree and whistled at Miss Fancy. When she turned her head, Frank drew his arm back and sent a peanut flying into Miss Fancy's yard. He grinned as she wiggled her trunk like a fishing line and popped the peanut into her mouth. Frank visited Miss Fancy every day. It was fun, but she was still so far away. He wanted to stroke her trunk the way the other children did. He thought her skin might feel like a tree bark. Let me move so I can read this. Hang on a second. Each night, Frank's mother read to him the latest news. Miss Fancy tossed hay at visitors with her hose pipe trunk. She kicked over a fire hydrant with her tree stump feet. Sometimes she pulled open the park gate. Her ears flip-flapped and her tail swish-swished as she strolled down the neighborhood streets and peeked inside windows. The elephant's adventures gave Frank an idea. If something as big as Miss Fancy could slip out of the park, maybe he could slip in. Hang on a second. Let me get back to this. There we go. The next day, his stomach somersaulted. He stood in front of the no colored allowed sign. He looked left, then right. A woman glared at him. No, his feet wouldn't budge. It was against the law. He walked around the back entrance. Mr. Todd, would it be possible for me to pet Miss Fancy? Mr. Todd shook his head. Wish I could, but it's not up to me. I might lose my job. Then where would Miss Fancy be? Frank's whole body sagged. But Frank wasn't giving up. On Sunday, he cornered Reverend Brooks. If I could just meet her up close, there's got to be a way. Maybe, said Reverend Brooks, we could write a letter to the city commission. Frank's eyes brightened. We could ask them to let our church inside the park for a picnic, and everyone could sign the letter. For the next week, Frank went door to door. Most people smiled and signed anyway. Others scowled and said Frank was wasting his time. Frank didn't rest until the letter was mailed, and then all that was left to do was wait. Finally, it happened. Reverend Brooks pulled a letter from his pocket. Good news, he said. We are pleased to inform you that the city of Birmingham hereby approves your request to hold a picnic on the grounds at Avondale Park. Frank whooped. Things were changing just like his mother said, and they would, just like his mother said they would. And now they were all going to meet Miss Fancy. But the day before the picnic, Reverend Brooks appeared at Frank's door. I'm sorry, Frank. There's not going to be a picnic. Some folks don't want us in the park. There could be trouble. Frank swallowed. Trouble meant black people would be hurt or worse. He ran to his room and buried his head in his pillow. He tried everything he knew to get close to Miss Fancy. Everything. And then it came to him. There was only one thing left to do. He ran all the way to the park. Next time you escape, Miss Fancy, follow those peanuts. The next morning, Frank woke to a neighbor's scream. Someone call the police. Frank ran to the door. Miss Fancy. He grabbed the bag of peanuts. By the time he got to the porch, Miss Fancy had wandered across the yard. Frank gulped as she trampled through his mother's patch of petunias. He followed as Miss Fancy nibbled on Miss Harper's lawn. He giggled when she left behind a big smelly mess. As she turned the corner, Frank's eyes widened. Didn't Miss Fancy see cars coming? Didn't she know how dangerous that intersection was? He had to get Miss Fancy back to the park before she got hurt. He raced to the front of her, dropping one peanut after another. When they got back to the park, they were met by a police officer. Good job, son. Frank nodded but didn't speak. The no colored allowed sign glinted in the morning sunlight, in the morning light. His time with Miss Fancy was almost up. Sir, he said, it was now or never. Would it be possible for me to pet Miss Fancy? The officer studied Frank for a long moment. How would you like a ride? A ride? Frank's breath caught. He'd seen white children riding Miss Fancy, but he never really believed he might get to ride too. As Mr. Todd helped Frank climb up Miss Fancy's tree stump feet, her tail swished. You'd make a great elephant keeper, Mr. Todd said. Frank grinned. The higher he went, the louder his heart thumped. When he straddled her neck, she lifted her hosepipe trunk and her ears flapped. He stroked the skin on her head. It didn't feel like tree bark at all, more like Frank's favorite pair of shoes. Frank laid his head against Miss Fancy and breathed in her mud puddle smell. The sun warmed his shoulders as he paraded right past the gates of Avondale Park. Oh, that story is such a good story. I hate that Frank wasn't allowed to go in. I'm glad things have changed now, but what a great story. And then there is a picture of the real Frank and the real Miss Fancy. Thank you. And if you are in my school, then that means you are voting on this book, that this book will be, let me stop sharing. This book is going to be battling I Am Every Good Thing. So go listen to that book, and then you can go on our Schoology page and vote. Thank you guys. See you later.